Hello, everyone. I'm back, and I'm here to talk about the subject of toxic shame and how that affects men and how that impacts relationships and all that jazz. All right, if my voice sounds a little muffled, I have the air on. I'm in the car, so just bear with me. Um, but what I define as toxic shame is basically feeling that a part of you, if people got to know some part of you, then you, then they would reject you. And if people got to know the real you, then you wouldn't be worthy enough. You're not worthy enough of connection. So toxic shame basically is what isolates us men from seeking the connections that we actually want. You know, a common topic today is the problem with men's loneliness and men's depression, and I think part of it stems from the effects of toxic shame on our masculine identities, and we've all been affected in some way by toxic shame, whether it's through childhood or just through socialization and just pure rejection or how we just grow up. Everyone is influenced in some way by toxic shame. And the thing with toxic shame is that it's very subtle, so you don't recognize it for what it is because it's very subtle, and it's easy to believe that you are somehow inherently at fault. And toxic shame shows up in a way of criticizing yourself. You feel that you are less than for some perceived flaw that you have. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it's hard for men to be vulnerable in their relationships with each other is because of toxic shame. Sorry that the AC's on in the car. I have to keep it on in the car. But because we inherently believe that if I were to show people my all of my flaws and everything about me, then they will judge me or reject me. And it's so important for human connection is important. And but as I was saying before, toxic shame doesn't allow you to be yourself when it comes to making friends, or just it doesn't allow you to feel it just it makes you split off parts of yourself that you think you need to hide from people so that they don't see you for you, and it doesn't allow for any sort of real love to happen, because if you're in toxic shame, then you wear many masks to hide that, because you feel like if people know the real me, then they wouldn't like me. So toxic shame is very subtle, but it also has a huge impact on our relationships with other people. And the way out of toxic shame is by first acknowledging it. And that's kind of what I'm going to do in this today, is just acknowledge that toxic shame does exist. And it manifests itself in different ways, and whether that be anxiety, depression, substance use, or just chronic anger, or however that is. It happens. It shows up. It's very subtle, but it also shows up in ways that you don't expect. And when you do struggle with things like anxiety or substance use, you can shame yourself for the struggle without knowing that you are influenced by toxic shame. And also, just a disclaimer, this is my perspective. I know that mental health problems and substance use is more complex than just toxic shame, but I would argue that it has a huge influence on our behaviors, and it even can cause a lot of avoidance in relationships or self-sabotage. When a friendship's going well, we might self-sabotage it, or just we might sabotage it unconsciously, because we are dealing with the effects of toxic shame. And I believe that toxic shame contributes to men and feeling lonely in their life, and feeling like are all alone, or just the state of loneliness. I believe that toxic shame does affect that, or is a factor, because if you inherently feel that you're not worthy of connection, sorry, I'm in the car again. But if you inherently feel that you're not worthy of connection, then you're not going to take the right steps towards connection, like vulnerability. You're not ever going to be vulnerable, because why risk being judged or rejected if I am vulnerable, if I share a piece of myself with the world and try to establish human connection? I'm going to feel just, I will be, oh, sorry, I got distracted. I'm risking that risk of rejection. I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be judged for what I perceive to be a flaw within me. And I am going to reject the love that people give to me, because that is my inherent identity, is toxic shame. I have a shame-based toxic identity of myself, which is the narrative of I'm bad, I'm worthless, I'm inherently a bad person. Now, we might not consciously think that on a conscious level, but that's more like a deeper subconscious belief that I am inherently a bad person. And we can track those beliefs by our actions. If our actions are not aligned with our values, and if our actions go against what's good for us, like connection, if our actions are more towards loneliness, and if we isolate ourselves from people, then that reflects the toxic shame mindset identity that we have. And we won't show up in our friendships the way that we could, because we feel that something is inherently wrong with us. So who would want to connect with someone that's a bad person? Who would want to connect with me? Who would want to care for me? And who would want to be my friend? It's that narrative that everyone can kind of relate to, but it's something that people that deal with toxic shame have on a deeper level. Now, my journey with toxic shame, I kind of discovered that I struggled a little bit with toxic shame a couple years ago when I read Brene Brown's books on toxic shame and listened to her TED Talks. So I realized that I had suppressed parts of myself because I didn't believe that people would want to see that. Oh my gosh. Someone just walked past my car and it was awkward because they're going to think I'm talking to myself. Anyway, but toxic shame shows up in a way by believing that people will not actually like the real you. So you might develop many different identities that are not your true self. And that's kind of what I did for a while. I think dealing with like my problem was that I was afraid of intimacy, and I was afraid to be vulnerable in friendship. I kind of didn't know how to do that because I was always the helper, so I didn't know how to be vulnerable myself, and I didn't know how to get to the place where I can just be freely myself in friendships because of that toxic shame mindset. I thought that something was inherently wrong with me, that was like kind of my core belief. And also just unaddressed trauma. Like um I think I mentioned on the podcast a little bit before, but I was severely bullied in middle school, and I was like socially rejected. So having years of that experience of not being appreciated for your core self and your identity, that will create an identity of toxic shame. Like something is inherently wrong with me that I need to fix so that I can be accepted by other people. And that's what I believed. I believed those lies because I didn't really know anything else. I believe that toxic shame influences how men relate to each other. So, as always, I always mention like the man box and how men might feel pressure to be on guard around other men. When we're interacting with other men, we always feel like we have to be on guard, um, because that is an influence from toxic shame. Because if we reveal our true selves around the presence of other men, then we're going to be rejected, or we're going to be labeled as um, weak, or we're going to have those labels because we're being influenced by toxic shame and we're not allowed to be ourselves. So we're going to feel just have our walls up and our what I call our man gear up. So if we want to heal our toxic shame and confront it, first it's if I recommend my listeners, if to consider the option of seeing a therapist, because they can help you process toxic shame. But on your own and within yourself is to first acknowledge its impact on you, and understand that you have been conditioned to toxic shame. You did not choose to toxic shame. You didn't choose to hide your true identity, or you didn't choose that. You've been conditioned to suppress parts of yourself because of society or your upbringing. But it doesn't have to end right there. We can have a conscious choice to choose to heal from toxic shame and live a more authentic life. Now, this isn't easy at all, but once you take the steps and process it out, because it's a journey, so to heal from it and heal from toxic shame is going to be a huge process for you, and it's going to be very uncomfortable at first because no one wants to recognize that they feel toxic shame or some inherent. No one wants to feel that on a conscious level that they are inherently bad. No one does. But once you admit it and you develop self-compassion for yourself, you realize that you're not the terrible person that you think you are, but you've been conditioned to believe that way. And once you realize that and acknowledge that, then you can take the steps to heal. For me, it's just been recognizing toxic shame and reading a lot of Brené Brown's work, and still do a lot of shame research. My I'm going to school to get my counseling psychology degree, but I also want to use it to really tackle the concept of toxic shame and how that affects attachment, how that affects how we relate to other adults in the world, and why do we have so much toxic shame, and yeah, and why have we been. That's kind of what I want to really discover. And through my reading so far is being inspired by Brene Brown's work on toxic shame, um, and healing the symptoms, which include perfectionism or wearing social mask so that you can, try to fit into a social situation. We might not see that as toxic shame, but it is a result of toxic shame. So I encourage my listeners to, um, yeah, uh, read Brene Brown and do that. Also, know that you're not alone in feeling this way. Um, I would argue that most people have some impact on toxic shame, from toxic shame, unless you had a perfect childhood. Now that's doesn't exist. Our parents do the best that they can, and they, with the wisdom that they have, and if your caregivers aren't emotionally mature to value your own authenticity, then you're going to develop toxic shame as a result sometimes, and you will feel that there's something inherently wrong with me because I wasn't fully accepted by my caregivers. Whoops, my phone. Now, definitely recognize that and deal with your. We always kind of want to suppress that part of ourselves. We will always say, "Oh, my child had a great childhood. It's very nice." Acknowledging that some of your authentic or emotional needs weren't met doesn't equate to not having a good childhood. It's just simply acknowledging the fact that you want to heal from the toxic shame that from the lack of authenticity that wasn't allowed or that wasn't mirrored by your caregivers. So if you're an adult and you seeking to have more healthy relationships, then acknowledging toxic shame is a step in the right direction, at least in my perspective. Again, take what I say with a grain of truth. This is my perspective, and it's something that I want to share with my listeners or the world. So that's kind of all I want to start with today. I will definitely be talking about shame and masculinity throughout in future episodes. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, I will be signing off.